Welcome to Sector Zero, a survival horror game set in the decrepit halls of an underground research facility. You play a young test subject who wakes up to a gruesome scene, the aftermath of a terrible accident. The gameplay in Sector Zero centers around three main aspects: stealth, puzzle solving, and exploration. There is no way to defeat the monster, so the player must rely on stealth and distraction. The facility in its ruined state gives the player a variety of obstacles to hide behind, like tables, counters, and beds. There are also cabinets and lockers that can be used to quickly escape the monster, at the risk of being discovered. While moving around the facility, it is important to listen for the monster, but know that you are not the only one listening. Too much noise could be your end, or, if used strategically, you could distract the monster and buy yourself some time to explore. When starting out, large portions of the facility are locked off. While exploring the facility, the player will need to find key items to access different areas of the level, and access other important items. These items are scattered throughout the facility, and most don't need to be gathered in any specific order. So whichever direction the player chooses to explore, they are bound to find something of value. We didn't want progressing to feel like a series of fetch quests, which is why key items aren't the only way to access new locations. Sometimes the player needs to solve a puzzle by interacting with certain objects. There are tapes which can offer the player guidance, but never give the full solution. We wanted to make sure that the player could feel good about solving the puzzle themselves. Because there is no set path, it is easy to forget what has been discovered so far, especially when coming back to the game. To help the player, we've given them an inventory which lets them see all of the items that they have collected so far. There is also a to-do list which keeps track of notable discoveries and places to return to. Items throughout the world are more than just keys and subtle hints. While exploring, the player can find many notes and tapes which paint a picture of the events that have transpired. We wanted to make every part of the facility tell a story, either through the items or the environments, so that the player is constantly discovering as they explore, giving them something to think about in those quiet moments when the monster is out of sight.
The main inspiration for our monster was the alien from Alien Isolation. The way it behaved was very similar to what we wanted. When deciding what abilities the monster will have, the one that stuck was a monster that can look through the eyes of its past victims in order to search for the player, adding depth to the way the monster behaves. The alien was built using behavior trees, so we settled on using the same system. Thus we built a custom editor tool allowing us to visually model these trees. This editor supports live debugging information while the game is running to allow you to exactly see where the tree is executing at any moment, but a complex behavior tree can only do so much. So, we implemented an additional AI that runs in parallel with the monster. This AI acts as a manager and adapts and changes the monster's tree based on the state of the game. It also does a lot of calculations to determine exactly how much pressure the player is under any given moment. This is crucial because if the player is constantly under pressure, the game becomes too hard and discourages exploration, which is an important aspect of the game. Based on the amount of pressure the player is under, the manager swaps the monster AI between two main states. The first state is called the gray state. This is where the monster will intentionally search the furthest rooms from the player to allow them to breathe, encouraging players to progress without needing to worry too much about the monster. Once the pressure lowers enough, the monster is swapped into its menace state. During this state, the manager gives the monster hints to where the player is, allowing it to apply more pressure. This forces the player to remain on their toes and tread carefully, making the monster feel smart and terrifying.
Deciding on a style was a long process. We knew a 2D game would be more viable for the limited time we had. In our search for inspiration, we came across 2D horror games like House and 3D games like Soma. We wanted the player to be able to explore the environment in 3 dimensions, just like how they would be able to in 3D games. In the end, we settled for a balance between a low-resolution style and a top-down perspective. From the beginning of the project, we knew we wanted a dreary, lifeless, and almost realistic style, avoiding cartoonish outlines and high contrast in favor of an unsaturated palette. The lack of saturation was meant to emphasize the feeling of dread. We also wanted to hammer in the atmosphere of the facility, one of death and isolation, as the only sentient life in the facility is you and the monster and its eyes. For the environment, we didn't limit our color palettes. However, for the characters, we only used 3 tones to shade them to make animating them easier. In our commitment to immersion, the game features little to no HUD. The lack of a HUD was meant to immerse the player into the world and to reduce any distractions. But in order to provide the player a better experience, we had to try and find a balance between immersion and information. This information takes the form of small pop-ups and dialog boxes. All of the UI elements in the game have a realistic style to try and immerse the player more into the world. And instead of directly giving the player any sort of explicit directions, we guide them using the environment. We originally planned to have more than one monster, each with its own unique ability. But due to time constraints, we settled on one monster, an intimidating creature that can see through the eyes of its past victims. After many iterations, we landed on this design, a tall, imposing figure with many eyes on its head and stomach, symbolizing the souls and the eyes of the victims it has taken. The protagonist is the opposite, small and unimposing. When designing the protagonist, we wanted to immediately communicate how they would be played based on their appearance. We wanted to make it clear that they are no match for the monster. At the same time, we didn't want them to look helpless and weak. We wanted them to look like they were capable enough to escape. So we landed on this design, small, young, and plainly dressed with tied back hair and a confident stance. The main character has a more vibrant palette compared to her surroundings, and this was intentional. We went for this palette to make her stand out better and to symbolize life within the lifeless facility.
When creating Sector 2, we had to take a lot into consideration to try and make the player experience as good as possible. The two biggest aspects to focus on when designing the layout of the level were the monster and stealth dynamic, as well as trying to create an immersive and interesting level to explore. We knew that, for the player, progression would not be linear, and they would need to move back and forth throughout the facility to find all the items and objects that they needed. Taking inspiration from other survival horror games, like Soma and Alien Isolation, we designed the halls to loop and interconnect. We wanted to ensure that the player doesn't have to frequently retrace their steps, and has a direction to escape should the monster come stomping by. We also wanted to give the monster freedom to move around the facility easily, so that it can surprise the player and create for exciting encounters. Exploration is one of the core aspects of the game, both when searching for key items and experiencing the lore surrounding the game. When designing the level, we had to consider places the player might get bored or tired of walking, and try to make each area of the map interesting or valuable to the player. Every room has either a key item, some interesting piece of lore, or an interesting piece of environmental storytelling to reward the player for exploration and avoid dull moments of gameplay. Combining these aspects produced this level, with all of its interconnectivity and interesting features. Thanks for checking out Sector 0, and we look forward to seeing all of you at Project Day.